Hi everyone. I thought I'd record a quick session on diet and injury because obviously injury is just one of those things. As a football player, you're going to get injured at some point of time. And what I thought this video could do is just give you some advice that if you do get injured, what sort of things can you do nutritionally that might help reduce the impact of that injury, so how long you're out for and how quickly you get back to playing. And there's some evidence that getting your nutrition right can help with that, and obviously that's what we all want, is to get back playing again quickly and get back to the sort of fitness levels we were. So how can we help with that whole sort of rehabilitation process and recovery from injury, as well as reducing the impact on how long you're out for? So there are some things that can be done. I mean, in a typical squad of players, literature suggests you're probably going to get about 50 injuries per season. Majority of those will be minor, where people are out for sort of less than 7 days, sort of knocks and scrapes and rolling your ankle, those sort of things, where they're relatively minor, get you back playing again quickly. But then also over and above that, there's a potential for 9 severe injuries where a player may be out for more than 28 days. And we all know about all the publicity around ACL injuries, but what I'm trying to do here is to say, well, if we do get those injuries, one, can nutrition help to reduce the incidence of those injuries? And that's part of what this study is trying to do, but also to see whether if and when you do, whether we can get you back playing quickly. So at any one point in time, that sort of rate would mean that you'd probably have 6 players injured at any one time, and that's obviously going to impact the success of the team. Some of those, like I said, will be out for a week, some of them will be out for months, but potentially 2 of those injuries are going to be severe out of that 9. You think over a season, a couple of players may be out at any point in time with a severe injury. So it's going to impact on the success of the team, both in having them out, but the length of time they're out for, what we call the burden of that injury, how severe it is and then how long. And that will obviously vary a lot with the type of injury and the player themselves. So what can we do? Well, there's we talk about injury, talk about different phases. So the first phase is the healing and recovery. So you've got a phase where you've got injured and you need to repair that wound or that injury, whatever it is, whether it's muscular or broken bone or all sorts of different types of injuries. And some may involve immobilization, so a reduction in the level of activity. But there's different phases. So this inflammation phase is that initial phase where the body is reacting to the injury and trying to repair it. And then afterwards, after the body's sort of inflames response, then it then starts to try and mend and repair that. So you've got these different phases and there's different bones and stresses and responses to it, but that's all part of the wound healing process, and it can be from hours up to days. And the question is, can we help with that with what we eat during that period? This is saying that the initial response may be to reduce inflammation, sort of to have anti-inflammatories, etc. But in some ways that can compromise healing because the body has its own healing process. So that initial response, we don't want to necessarily reduce the inflammation. We want that process to take place so that the wound can, whatever the injury is, can repair. And then after that, we may then need to think about other of what the diet can give us. The other thing to think about is that immobilization leads to muscle atrophy. So the fact you're not using that muscle, if it's injured, if you've got it, so you're not using whatever it is, whether it's a hamstring injury, so you're not using that leg as much, or an ACL and therefore you're in a cast or whatever, then the muscle in that leg that isn't being used is going to reduce in size and in strength. So what we're trying to do is to say, well, yeah, that's part of the process, but we want to reduce the effect of that muscle atrophy so that when we start training again, we haven't got as much ground to make up. So that's phase one. So there's this idea that muscle atrophy is about protein turnover. So if we think about when we had the protein session, what I'm going to suggest at the end of this session is you would, if you're injured, go back and have a look at that protein video, because we want to counter the effect of that muscle atrophy by increasing the proportion of protein we eat, so that it will help with the wound healing process, but it will reduce the amount of muscle we lose during an injury period. So the idea is coming up with a nutrition strategy that can sort of compensate for this loss in muscle and this reduction in the balance of protein, so that, like I said, we attenuate the muscle atrophy, so we reduce the amount of wasting that you get in the muscle. And the second phase is when you're then the sort of the rehab phase, when you're trying to build that muscle back up again. Any nutritional deficiencies across the board can compromise recovery, so you need to make sure that you're getting enough energy. Again, going back to that original energy lecture, you're then starting to make sure that you're in energy balance, so that helps to optimize the recovery. You may have seen in the newspaper and various magazines there's this term of RED-S, relative energy deficiency syndrome, and that is about not having enough energy after your exercise to sort of support all your bodily functions. So you need to make sure that energy balance is being achieved, so you don't suffer any side effects for energy deficiency. Energy deficit can compromise wound healing, and sometimes you feel like you're not exercising as much, so you don't need as much energy, but in fact the actual sort of process of recovery means you need more energy. So the energy deficit, or the reduction in energy you need because you're not playing and training, might not be as much as you think. And one way of doing that and monitoring energy balance is monitoring your weight. What is your normal weight? And then, because what you're trying to do is get a balance where you want to stay in energy balance, you want to make sure you've got enough energy to optimize this recovery phase, but you don't want to have too much, because obviously if you then start to put on body fat and body weight, then obviously that's going to work against you when you're trying to get back to where you were, if you put too much weight on. So it is a balancing act, but obviously what you're trying to do is reduce that muscle wasting by making sure that nutritionally you're getting it as optimal as you can. So too high would increase body fat, and therefore that could compromise return to play. So it is about trying to get the balance right so that you're recovering without jeopardizing that return to play. So what we're trying to do is say we want macronutrient balance, we want to get the nutrient intakes right, but reduced energy. If you are eating slightly less, to say normally at 2,500 calories, when you're recovering you're at 2,000 or 2,200 is probably more like it. But what you don't want to do is really reduce the amount of protein. You don't want excess fat. You want to optimize those macronutrients. So you want to get, if you go, like I said earlier, if you go back to that protein talk, that protein video, we want to maintain that level of protein. So even if you're having less calories overall, the protein proportion needs to be higher. You need to keep that protein up at that 2 to 2.5 grams per kilo, those 20 grams per meal, 40 grams in the evening. So go back and look at the foods you need to be eating, but to maximize the amount of protein. And it's probably going to be more like at those levels at 1/3 of your plate as protein, whereas before it was probably more like 15-20%. Maintain the protein intake, make that a bigger proportion of your plate of food, and that will help with recovery. So it becomes a greater proportion of your energy than when during your normal diet, because of you being in the recovery phase, and that may be using protein powders. It doesn't need to be. You can just have more meat, dairy, eggs, things that are high in nuts, seeds, things that are high in protein, but make those much bigger part of your plate of food. Sort of almost focus on the protein part during you, particularly that rehab and recovery. And like I said, the time is important, that you evenly spread it through the day, so you have that high quality protein source with each meal, 3 or 4 meals a day, and ideally one late at night. So the micronutrients, those things we have in small quantities, they can help with recovery, and there's various ones of those: creatine, omega-3, antioxidants, vitamin D, A, C and E, minerals, iron and calcium, and we will talk about those more in the sort of micronutrients talk on this. But what it's about is having a balanced diet. And one thing you can do, so the omega-3s, which have been shown to be sort of quite good at helping with recovery, they're also good. There's some good sources of protein that you can use for that, particularly fish. A couple of portions of oily fish a week, that's giving you protein, but that's also giving you these healthy omega-3 fatty acids that have been shown to help with recovery, particularly in muscles. If you're not a fish eater, there's flaxseed, chia seeds, walnuts, soybeans, lots of foods that are not necessarily animal-based foods that can help with that, but also think about that balance of the diet. So then, like I've said before, getting the balance of the diet right means you tick the boxes on some of these other elements, these other micronutrients. But focus on protein, focus on fish, oily fish, mackerel, etc., and think about potential sources of those. Whether you have a bag of walnuts that you snack on, that can all help with this recovery process. Supplementation, bit of a question mark, because if you get the diet right, you don't really need to supplement, but it depends on the balance of the diet. Food first, but not only food approach. So the idea is you get the food right, you optimize nutritionally what you're eating, and then if there are any gaps, then potentially you might supplement, particularly things like iron and calcium, if the balance of the diet isn't optimal on all of these potential sort of micronutrients that help with that recovery process. So this is quite a nice sort of slide that just summarizes that. So recommendations: avoid nutritional deficiencies, maintain energy balance, make sure you're getting enough energy, you're maintaining your body weight, because that will help with that, limiting the damage that's done and optimizing your recovery. And then during recovery, maintain a high protein intake. Think about that 2 to 2.5 grams protein per kilogram body mass, so bigger proportion of your plate. And then some of these other, what they call nutraceuticals, so nutritional aids to recovery, can, like omega-3s, making those part of your diet as well, will all help towards limiting the recovery, limiting the damage rather, and then improving the recovery process and helping with that return to play and optimizing the sort of whole rehab process.